Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
When I was a kid, my parents were really passionate about a particular experience they wanted us to have. I'm Julie Lyles Carr. This is the AllMomDoes Podcast. And what my parents were really passionate about, I grew up in the high desert of Southern California, which meant that we had access to some really amazing nature all around us. And even though my mom and dad were in highly technical fields, my dad was literally a rocket scientist, my mom was an accountant, we carved out time frequently to go into the Tehachapi Mountains, to go to Yosemite, to go to the beach, to check out things within the high desert itself. I never forgot how impactful that was. And I knew, particularly for my parents, it was a way they really connected in their relationship to God that I didn't necessarily hear a lot of people talking about. It was kind of different at that time, and particularly in the church that I grew up in, that my parents really embraced God's creation as a way to better understand Him, to better connect to Him. My guest today, Eryn Lynum, this is her heartbeat. This is what she talks so much about to families, about what it means to really engage in nature. Eryn, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me, Julie. I actually love your background and that you share that because I grew up very similarly. My dad is a computer scientist and my mom is an engineer, but they did the same. They got us out camping and hiking as much as they could. And yeah, it is impactful.
It is. And I want to talk more on that. Eryn, give the listener a little window into where you are in the world, the kids, the cats, the dogs, the hamsters, whatever you got.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I've been married to my husband, Grayson, for almost 14 years. And we have 4 kids. We have 3 boys who are 11, 10, and 8, and our daughter is 5. And yes, the animals too, the dog and the cat and the axolotl. Do you know what that is?
Oh, nice. I do know what those are. They are so cute.
These crazy little dragonfish that are actually amphibians. That's been a fun addition. But we live in northern Colorado, right up against the Rocky Mountains. This hasn't always been home. We didn't grow up in the wilderness. We've actually spent a lot of time in the city, but we came out here because we just saw this incredible connection that we have with God in nature and using materials in nature to teach theology and who God is. Like that's how Jesus taught, right? In the Gospels, he uses sparrows and wildflowers and sand. And we just, we knew that if we brought our kids outside, we'd have all these other resources, this rich environment to point them to who God is. And that's really what brought us out here.
That is just incredible. And it's interesting, Eryn, going back to our childhoods, because I grew up that way with my parents, just constantly throwing us out in the backyard. And the neighborhood where I grew up, our house was the last house in the neighborhood before it was this expanse of high desert in the Antelope Valley of California, all the way out to the dry lake bed. And I think about that now, how my mom would be like, go, just go. And we'd go out there among the Joshua trees. And thankfully, we never ran into a lot of snakes, which is actually amazing to me to think about to this day. But that was more of the childhood we had, in addition to the things that my parents were also intentionally doing, all of the camping and all of those kinds of things. And sounds like you had a very similar upbringing. But what I find is that that's kind of unusual. When I talk about how much I thought everybody was like this. Like, this is what you do. You go outdoors all the time. But I realized that that isn't how everyone grew up. It wasn't exactly their experience. And so what do you find when you talk to people? Do you find that you have a lot of people in your world who did have more of this experience? Or do you think we're having to be more intentional than ever to create these kind of moments?
I definitely find a mix of how people grew up, but more and more we're seeing less kids growing up that way. Like definitely I relate to your upbringing. Behind our house was this big field that we could walk through to get to these ponds. And I remember as a kid just spending countless hours, like we would lose sense of time because we were just out in the woods exploring and playing. And that is so countercultural today. Like we're not seeing that a lot. So this is becoming all the more important for today's generation that we do become intentional because this is no longer the default. I believe that this is how God created our kids to spend time, that when they get outside and they see him, time becomes all the more richer and it's filled with these meaningful moments. Like we're not wasting time. We're not killing time. We're actually using it. God is outside of time, right? He's timeless and he has no beginning, no end. And yet he puts this confine, these limits of time around our lives. And I believe that's to teach us, to compel us to spend time wisely. Like we see in Psalm 90:12, teach me to number my days that I may gain a heart of wisdom. And so really just being intentional, especially nowadays, to encourage our kids to get out into God's wild and wonderful world so that they can discover him.
What do you say to the mom who says, I mean, that all sounds lovely and, just such a beautiful scene from some kind of movie to think my kids could be out wandering through the prairie or into the woods. And yet I live in the middle of suburbia where it would not be safe for them to be doing that kind of thing. We don't have much of a yard. We're in an apartment. We're in a townhouse, whatever the situation is. Oh, and let me throw in there, I'm not a camping person. That's like not my thing. How do you encourage parents in that way who don't really have this shared experience, who don't have this profile of feeling like they're an outdoors person or someone who loves to hike or loves to go to the lake? How do you encourage them to help their kids see God in nature, particularly when maybe those resources don't seem as easily available?
Mm-hmm. For one, this was me. I mean, yeah, I grew up camping and hiking, but like most people, somewhere along the line, that sense of wonder decayed. And I really lost that love for going outdoors. And it was actually my children who reawakened that within me and taught me to love going outside again. But like I mentioned, we haven't always been here in the Rocky Mountains. We didn't always have this access. Like our love for nature really took root in the city when we lived in Kansas City, Missouri. And I remember we would just take every opportunity we had and find every little pocket of nature that there was. So there was this little 3-mile nature trail at the edge of the city, and we would walk that thing several times a week. We would go walk along the river or play at the green space by the park. And so it might not look like the ocean or the mountains, but God has given us these resources, even if it's the park down the street. And there's so many ways too to bring nature indoors. I have a whole chapter in my book about this because I think it's so important to give our kids that exposure every day, even if that means houseplants all over the house or a fish aquarium or hanging bird feeders out the windows, to really bring nature close to our kids and give them all of these benefits, because we see not only spiritual benefits, which is huge, but also physical and mental and emotional benefits from exposure to nature, because God is the bringer of life. And when we surround our kids with nature, we are surrounding them with reminders and reflections of our God who brings new life.
I love that you talk about these little pockets where there is nature that we can immediately access, because full confession, here I was, Eryn, raised by parents who put all kinds of intention into taking myself and my 2 brothers camping. Then I went on to have my own 8 children living in suburbia. We don't camp, and we don't camp for really good reason, because I don't think I could survive it with 8 kids. Like, I just don't know that I have the organizational skills to put it together. It's hard enough for me to maintain any sense of order with running water and toilets in the house. I don't know what would happen if we tried to rough it. But, I kind of got in this loop for a while that was problematic, because to my mind, if I couldn't get my kids to the beach or to the lake or to the mountains, then it didn't count as wilderness. Now, I still love when we have opportunity to travel to places like that, and we really embrace it, not from a tent, but when we have the opportunity and we're able to do it, we'd love to get ourselves to somewhere where we can access those kinds of things. But to your point, I had to sort of relearn, if you will, that it was just as valid to take the little trail through the park, to stop for a moment and see the little turtles that were at the creek, to take the kids to the zoo. That was another way that we engaged nature, particularly in some of the more urban settings in which we lived. So that sense of wonder, even though it wasn't out in the wild, and I think there's something really valuable about going into open spaces and trying things in that way, but it still gave my kids that sense of how powerful God's creation is, all of the variety, the really cool things, the trivia that happens in all of the different things that God put together and the little details. So I think that adjustment of perspective is really powerful because you're right. Not all of us can do all of this or head to the Tetons, but we can walk outside and look up at a night sky with our kids. And that's really impactful. I love the title of your book, Rooted in Wonder. Tell me about the wonder that you have experienced. Of course, I think a lot of us would feel that sense of wonder at a particularly high mountain or crystal blue lake, but where are places that you have connected to the wonder of God's creation in some unexpected places?
You talked about taking kids out to look at the night sky, and that is such a profound experience. I love that God strung together the galaxies, and as he did so, he created just this incredible reminder of his vastness and his wonder. And I've had these experiences. I refer to them in the book as Hebron experiences, and that refers back to Genesis 15. And that's where God is making this covenant promise with Abram in Hebron. And the first thing that God does, we read in the text, God took Abram outside. And I love that. I love that we as parents can do the same, that we can take our kids outside. And then what did God do? He made this covenant promise of descendants and legacy, and he rooted it in the visual of the night sky. He pointed Abram to the skies. And so I think about Abram like in challenges after that in life, or when he had doubts in his faith, just looking at the stars and remembering that promise that God made. And so I think we can give our kids these Hebron experiences where they profoundly connect with God in creation. I witnessed my son having one of these experiences a few years ago. We were exploring the Pacific Northwest, and we had actually sold our home in Colorado, bought this super used 20-foot travel trailer, and booked it out west for 9 weeks to explore the Puget Sound. And it happened, we didn't really plan this, but we got to the coast right in time for the total solar eclipse of 2017. And everyone had told me, if you're going to see this eclipse, go to somewhere where you can see it in a totality zone. I had no idea what that meant. I just heard it's the best viewing area. And that morning, that proved so true because the eclipse started, it was about 9:45 in the morning. And suddenly the fog, which had been moving out all morning, rushed back in. It reversed.
Wow.
The sky starts getting dark. Temperatures plummet to like evening temperatures. Again, this is like 9:45 a.m. The seagulls and the sea lions start going crazy, just all this racket. And it gets darker and darker until we can actually see stars in the sky at 10 a.m. And then the eclipse happens. And for 1 minute and 45 seconds, the sun disappeared. And we were speechless, like my family and me just standing on this sandy hilltop in Newport, Oregon. And my son, who was 4 at the time, he finally speaks up and he just goes, wow, how does God do that? Like he had made this connection. And so just giving our kids, like it can be something as simple, although it's not simple, as a starstruck sky or lightning bugs and a rainbow, just giving our kids these experiences, whether they be big or small, and always connecting that back to God, reconnecting those dots between creation and creator, and talking about God as the artist and the architect and the inventor and the designer to really help them make that connection in their minds and their hearts.
Some of my very favorite summer memories are when I would go to the library during the summer as a kid, and I would just sit myself down in front of an aisle and just pull book after book after book, doing all kinds of reading and dreaming and researching. And that is something I still carry with me to this day. There's just something about getting into the library and taking some time to peruse the aisles, look at different things, let my mind go in different directions. And guess what? That's what we want you to do with the King County Library System, because this summer, there's a summer reading program for all ages. You can earn prizes for reading. You can enjoy different programs and activities at the library all summer long. This free summer reading program is open to children, teens, and adults. And here's the goal. Your goal is to read 20 minutes per day or you can set your own reading goal if you want through August 31st. Any kind of reading counts. So this includes reading to someone else out loud, or listening to an audiobook, or taking that little summer read to the pool while you play in the sunshine. So be sure and visit your community library to pick up a reading challenge log, or go to kcls.org/summer. That's kcls.org/summer to get started. So book it, see what I did there, to your King County Library system, and be sure and sign up for the summer reading program. One thing that we all could be in danger of missing, even in taking our kids to some of these incredible places in our country because of the commitment and investment that's been made into national parks, all the way to just the variety that exists on this particular continent that we're on in terms of these different geographies, animals, seascapes, landscapes, all of it. I tell you where I've messed up before, Eryn, is getting an agenda that's really tight. Like, we got to hike this day. We got to go here the next day. We've got to do this. We've got to do this. We've got to do this. I see in a lot of your work and in what you're saying that we have to be willing to also not only get our kids outside under the sky, but then take the pause to let them take it in, to let go a little bit of a really heavy agenda where we're going to go see this cliff this day and this glacial lake that day. And we are just going. And I've been guilty of it because, dang it, we're here. We got to sightsee. We got to get on schedule. So what is the self-talk you do within yourself to say, take a beat, Eryn? It's okay. Let's let them really soak up their surroundings. Let's take a moment to let them look at the salamander and not be looking at my watch. Like, what are the things you do to instill that kind of pause discipline into these outdoor experiences that you're providing for your kids?
First, I have definitely been guilty of that as well.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
No, last summer we took a trip to the Redwoods in California and then made our way up to Oregon. And we had 2 weeks to get over there, explore everything that we wanted to explore, and get home. And it was fast paced. And it was wonderful in its own way because we did get to see so much. But you're right, we miss something when we're rushing through these experiences. And so going back to our 9-week road trip that we did several years ago, the first 2 weeks of it, we were just rushing around trying to see everything. We felt this just exhilarating sense of freedom. We didn't have a house. We didn't have jobs. We didn't have a mortgage. Like, we were just exploring. So we were go. And it wasn't until we learned to stop and stay in a place at least 1 week before we moved on that we realized just the power of that. And I love, there's a scripture in Job that says, stop and consider the wondrous works of God. And I just love that scripture begins with stop, because that is key. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we've had so many fast-paced trips and felt that tension, but we have had so many profound and memorable experiences when we go a place and force ourselves to just stay. Like, one of our favorite things to do is to drive up into the mountains or to a wilderness area, to string up the hammocks, set out the chairs, grab the cooler out of the car, and we stay until we lose sense of time. And then we stay some more. And we let our kids, at first they might seem bored or like restless, but pretty soon they fill the time with just these incredible things. Like, they want to go down to the creek and build a little dam or build a stick fort. They just get busy in the most beautiful way when we let them explore an area at their own pace.
That's fantastic. Okay, so do this for me. I'm going to hit you cold with this. I'm so curious to see what you might come up with. Think of 2 things that for you are just these God-awe moments in his creation, whether it's an animal or a place or a process that our environment and our atmosphere goes through. Give me 2 for the listener to go look up that she can show her kids, like 2 things that just really dazzle you.
Ooh, okay. So one that comes to mind that I actually share about a lot because I just love it. We share about it on our podcast, Nat Theo. There's an episode, and it is the connection between monarch butterflies and the milkweed plant. So monarch are a specialized species. This means that they only lay their eggs on one plant, and that is milkweed. And so there's been these incredible efforts around the country to plant these corridors of milkweed to help the monarchs on their incredible migration journey. But what a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't for a long time, is that milkweed is actually toxic. So when an insect bites into it, it lets out this oozy, sticky sap that glues their mouths shut and they starve to death. So why would a mama monarch lay her eggs on this toxic plant? Well, the caterpillars that hatch, what they actually do is they go down to the vein of the leaf and they chew through it. They sever that vein to cut off the toxicity. And then they can go back up to the leaf and safely eat it. And I love this visual. And I use it to teach that, when we sense that something is a threat or toxic in our lives, whether that be a bad habit, a harmful relationship, a false idea, then we need to go back to the source of that and sever it so that we can keep ourselves clean and safe and healthy. And that the Holy Spirit gives us that discernment to cut off those toxins. And, we see so many of those toxins in our culture today. And so teaching our kids to be aware of dangers and then teaching them how to cut those off and keep themselves safe. So that's one I use.
That's gorgeous.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
It's incredible when you dig into nature and discover the details of it. You just begin making all these analogies to scriptural truth. And I believe that God made it that way. Like Romans 1:20, we read that his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world through what has been made so that we are without excuse. So, okay, you asked for two.
Love that. Oh, love that. Okay, I can't wait to hear the next one.
Okay, so another one I love to dig into is bird migration. And at this recording in May, we are at the peak of bird migration. So my family and I, we actually spent all this past Saturday in an annual statewide bird watching competition. My boys enter every year as a youth team, and it's a 24-hour period where you find as many species as you can. So this past Saturday, they made a personal record and found 70 species of birds.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just incredible watching them learn to do this, because what they're doing is they are paying attention to the details of nature and seeing just how finely God made everything. But birds, when they migrate, so they need two things. Okay, I'll ask you. So when you go on a long road trip, what are two things you absolutely need? What would you say?
Water and a really killer playlist.
Okay. Yes, that's fantastic. When I ask kids, they usually say snacks, which is key. And then something to navigate by, maps on your phone or, the old fashioned paper maps that no one uses anymore. So I use that to say, okay, birds do the same. They need fuel, as in food, and they need a navigational system. So for their fuel, these migrating species, there's one I focus on, the blackpoll warbler. It's a little tiny, beautiful songbird. He makes an incredible migrational journey, and part of it is nearly 2,500 miles over the ocean nonstop. This tiny little bird, he weighs as much as 2 quarters.
Wow.
Yeah. And he'll fly for 2 to 3 days nonstop. Before he does that, he stops over in New Jersey and fills up. He actually will double his weight to about 4 quarters to make that journey, but he has to just get ready and prepare. The second thing they need is a navigational system. And birds, they use 3 things to navigate. They use the position of the sun in the sky, or the position of stars at night. Scientists have actually proven that. They've done this really cool experiment where they put birds in a planetarium and they will display the vision of the night sky on the ceiling, and the birds will all face one direction. If they change the position of the stars, all the birds turn and change their position as well.
Wow.
They use the stars to navigate. But what about when it's overcast or foggy and they can't see the sun or the stars? Scientists have discovered that birds can sense the magnetic field, which is invisible. Some scientists believe they can actually see the magnetic field. And so I use all of this to point to how God has prepared these birds to make these incredible journeys, and how he has prepared us in the same way to boldly follow his plans for our lives. That just like the birds fueling up, we can fuel up on God's wisdom and peace and power as we go to him in prayer and as we fill up on the truth of his word. And then to navigate, God gives us his Holy Spirit and his scriptures, that just like the birds navigating these skies, we can listen to his spirit and we can go to his word, and he shows us exactly how to navigate life according to his plans and purposes.
Love that. So listener, you've got two that you can take to the kids, the monarch butterflies and birds. I love this. I think it's just absolutely incredible. Now you have another little thing that you also help parents with, and I hope I don't butcher the title for this concept, but it's 936 pennies. So unpack that for me because I'm really intrigued by this.
Yeah, that was my first book. And it came from when my husband and I were having our second son dedicated at church. So child dedication service, it's where you go before your church family and you are recognizing that your child is a gift from God and thanking God for that child, but also just how ridiculously hard this job of parenthood is, and going before the Lord and just saying, God, I want to raise this child to know and follow you. I need help. And so it's really the church coming alongside of you as you dedicate your child back to God. And so that's what we were doing. And our son was 1.5 years old. And our pastor, after he prayed over us, he handed us a gift. And it was a jar of 936 pennies. And he said, every penny in that jar represents 1 week that you have with your child between birth and 18. And so you can imagine, like, that just felt so heavy on my heart, like to visualize, to feel the weight of time and childhood. And he challenged us to remove a penny every week as a reminder that, you know, this isn't limitless and it is finite. And what are we doing with it? Are we spending this time well? I avoided doing that for a while because, as I mentioned, our son was 1.5 years old. So our first job was to remove 72 pennies. That felt so heavy. I felt like the time was gone, you know? And I think so many of us relate to that as parents, just feeling like, where did all of that time go already? And so I got this idea to set up a second jar. And so this is where we put our pennies every week so that we're not overwhelmed as the first jar is going down, but instead we look at that second jar and the pennies building up and remember that we are building into their legacy and eternity. We are making an investment. And so the 936 pennies, it's this visual reminder of Psalm 90:12, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom, and learning to use the time wisely and not be overwhelmed by the limits of time, but remembering that it's a gift from God and we get to use it and harness it and just really use it to bring him glory and how we're raising these kids.
That is so gorgeous. And I love that you adapted it for a perspective for your family that, yes, acknowledges that time's passing, but also acknowledges what you're putting into it, what you're hoping to build into your child. I think that's just gorgeous. So listener, 936 pennies. Now, Eryn, you and I both came from families that were more technical in their backgrounds, but somehow were able to say, okay, science, computing, data, math, all these things, but still remain in connection with God. Now, my dad went through a period of time where his highly scientific mind struggled with this. And he was in an industry where there were people who felt like there should be a gap between faith and science. Ultimately, he came back around into his own relationship with God that was really beautiful and was built actually through math. And it was a really interesting way that God came back into my dad's life and embraced him, and that my dad in turn embraced God. How do you talk with people? How do you help people understand that science and God work together? Like, it is not opposing fields. And I say it from the perspective of the childhoods you and I had, the homes that we came from, but I also know those who are highly suspect of anything that we call scientific because they think somehow it's going to be some diatribe against the creator. So in your passion for theology, how do you help people see these things are aligned, that science is something that God created?
This is such a fascinating conversation, and I love digging into it. And we see that science in the beginning was really a Christian effort. And natural theology was the study of seeing God through what he has made, and that Christians really forged the way for scientific discovery. And then we got to the scientific revolution and postmodernism and Darwinism, and really this worldview of materialism that claims that unless it can be seen, unless it is tangible, that it doesn't exist. And this is a huge deception of Satan's, because what does Satan do? He always takes an element of truth and skews it. And so he took this whole realm of seeing God through what he has made, and he started to just dissect it and butcher it and skew it in all these ways that what he was doing was making Christians hate science and be afraid of it and think that it was against God when really it's not. But what we're seeing nowadays is that the more progress the fields of science make, the more we're seeing how it connects to God. It is reflecting God. One example I love is, okay, so science a lot of times will say, if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. And a lot of people are from this worldview of materialism and this mindset of there is nothing supernatural, only the natural world exists. But scientists have discovered these two things called dark matter and dark energy. They are completely invisible. And they don't know what it is, but they know that they're out there. And they've recently discovered that they make up 95% of our universe. And so we have to conclude that 95% of our universe is invisible. And so what else might be out there that we cannot see, but exists? And scripture attests to this. Like, we see that God is the creator of everything visible and invisible, and that our war is not one that is only material, but supernatural and in the spiritual realms. But we're seeing more and more in science this reflection of God and of intelligence and of a creator. Like, we look at the finely tuned universe that is tuned in so carefully for one, life to exist, and then two, for us as humans to have intellectual capacity and curiosity that we can see the intelligence in everything that has been made. Like, I went to Bible college, but nothing has strengthened my faith more than digging into science. It has given me this foundation to stand upon that, yes, I needed the biblical understanding, and that's primary. God's primary revelation to us is through his written, active, inspired word. But we also have these other resources he has given us in history, in nature, in science to equip our kids to have a resilient and robust and mature faith rooted in his word and complemented through what he has made.
I so agree with you, because for me, the way I'm wired, it has so often been through science. And even though we have come from a scientific construct more recently, that is this whole precept of it has to be seen, we now have quantum theory, we have string theory, we have all these things that are coming alongside that are not out of a Christian construct. These are out of the labs. These are out of all of these different places that continue to say, wow, there is so much here that we cannot know. There is so much here that is so finely tuned, and there's so much architecture to what has happened. I find, just like you do, that these things are not in opposition. They only bolster my faith more and more. Well, Eryn, I thank you so much for being on and helping unpack for us ideas about getting our kids out into nature, how to guide them to see God there, and even this deeper dive into how we don't have to be scared of or think that science is somehow in opposition to our faith. Eryn, where can people find you on the interwebs? Where would you like them to go?
Thank you, Julie. So they can go to my website, and on there I have a ton of free resources to really dig into this. It's my name, Eryn, ERYN, Lynum, LYNUM.com. And on there are my books and free nature devotionals and activity guides. And then we also have a podcast, Nat Theo, that's short for natural theology, nature lessons rooted in the Bible. That's a podcast for kids, and it's short nature lessons that bring in deep theological truth. And that's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at my website.
All the places. All right. And Eryn, I'll have Rebecca get that into the show notes as well. Be sure and check out those show notes, listener. Rebecca does an amazing job every week, and that's where you can go find the links to all the things that we've been talking about. Also, go to AllMomDoes, AllMomDoes.com, and AllMomDoes on the socials. You'll find a great community there of moms just like you. And I'd love to see you too. I'm usually on Instagram the most, Julie Lyles Carr there, but you can find me at JulieLylesCarr.com, all those kinds of things. And I'll see you next time on the AllMomDoes Podcast.